It looks like we might be live. We will find out in a second. Good morning, in case you are there. And let me know how things are, if you can hear me or if you can see me. Um, you know, to avoid the issue of yesterday of not being, visible for the first 10 minutes or so. Okay, I can hear myself. That is good. Yeah. So let's try to be productive as every day. And I am much better rested and recovered than I was yesterday after, all that heavy metal stuff. So hopefully productivity will actually be achieved some more today. That would be, real neat. So to talk about stuff before we get into the first sprint, I did, however, read the entirety of Juanita Brooks's Mountain Meadows Massacre yesterday, which is a really good book. Highly recommended if you're into Mormon history. Otherwise, maybe not. But what I find interesting about both Mountain Meadows Massacre and No Man Knows My History, which are the two sort of big Mormon history books that came out roughly around the same time, that being, somewhere between 1945 and 1950. Both written by women. Juanita Brooks, obviously writing about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and Fawn McKay Brody writing No Man Knows My History, which is, biography of Joseph Smith. And what makes them very interesting is that you can see these are people who come from a Mormon background. Juanita Brooks remained in the church, although she certainly did not have like an easy time after publishing that book. And Fawn McKay Brody got excommunicated or cut off or left. It's a bit vague because she had later stated that she, in fact, already felt somewhat conflicted about Mormon beliefs before finishing her work on No Man Knows My History. So it may have been one of those parted ways amicably kind of things. Although I think there was an official sort of excommunication or taking her out of the temple rolls and everything. So doesn't really matter that much. What I think is important is with both books that they are really they're very passionate books, and I personally appreciate that because we often tend to write history books and go for with a lot of history books nowadays. Often authors go for this very clinical approach, and especially with Mormon history, that's something I've encountered in, and it kind of makes sense, right? Because if you want access to the LDS archives, there is certain stuff that may get, or for a long time was very hard to write, because if you wanted to write that's something very critical, they wouldn't let you into their private archives. So it limits the amount of information you can have, or you get all the access that you want, but then you can't certainly do a lot of stuff. And when you compare, for example, No Man Knows My History to Rough Stone Rolling, which is sort of the current big Joseph Smith biography by Richard Lyman Bushman, and it's a good one. Don't get me wrong; it's a very good biography. But Bushman does refrain from making any judgments about Joseph Smith's character, um, which, don't get me wrong, that's certainly a good approach for writing history, to just like present the facts. You can do that, but there is no sort of like larger attempt to sort of situate Joseph Smith as a character, make any final judgments on whether he made all that stuff up or whether he did, in fact, believe what he said, or whether he did, just, or, whether the religious tradition is actually correct. It's obviously, how can you? Because, it's kind of hard to make any final judgments on whether those gold plates exist or not, because we don't have them. But it's very interesting to compare those, because No Man Knows My History does, for example, take a firm stance on like where Joseph Smith is to be situated and what was good about Joseph Smith and what was really bad about him. And that passion is something that I personally really appreciate in some history books. It's usually, why I would recommend reading more. Like if doing research on a topic, for more than just you want to find out about it. And once you've read one book, you feel you have enough. I always recommend reading at least two books on the same sort of like subject, especially if it's kind of a slightly more controversial subject. And because like with like two books or three books on the same subject, you suddenly get different nuance, get different takes, and then you can start figuring out where you as a reader kind of fall in that. And having a book that is very clear and has sort of like takes a very clear and passionate stance makes it much easier to do that than just reading Lyman Bushman and going like, well, this all sounds really good, and then you go back and say, okay, here's all the stuff that he did not you know emphasize too much, or the likes. And I found that very interesting. And Mountain Meadows Massacre does the same thing in that it is very clear about showcasing how that specific event in Mormon history, and it's one of those big tragedies, so-called tragedies. You can also call it a crime. Hey, Britton, how you doing? So to put it very shortly, and it's definitely the next part that I need to record, talk about in a larger Mormon history video project. So this is just like additional research. To put it very quickly, Mountain Meadows Massacre was in 1857. A group of people, of travelers, 120 something people, wagons, lots of cattle, coming from Arkansas on the Oregon Trail all the way to California. And at Mountain Meadows, they were first attacked by possibly native tribesmen under either the lead or at least guidance or with collaboration from Mormon settlers in Mountain Meadows in Utah. They were besieged there at some point. One Mormon, John D. Lee, the only one who ever got executed for that crime, approached them with a flag of truce and goes like, well, we can help you get out of this. Lay down all your arms, follow us. We'll bring you on foot to the next village, and we make sure that you can get there from there to California. Which is exactly not what happened, because what happened was they dragged everyone out, all 120 something people, and brought them into like a narrow sort of path between bushes and cliffs and whatnot, and on a signal, Mormons shot everyone, every adult man, then together with native tribe allies, murdered everyone else over the age of 5 or 6 years, and 17 children were then taken basically and distributed among Mormon households in the area, because they were deemed to be too young to actually tell anyone what happened. And yeah, that's why we call it a Mountain Meadows Massacre. It was certainly one of the largest attacks, mass murders, whatever you want to call it, in that area, in the general sort of push west during that time. And as I said, there have always been like questions like, did John D. Lee do this on his own? Were there orders from like church headquarters? Did Brigham Young know about it? Did he or not? And as I said, the narrative, the official one, was that basically John D. Lee did all of this on his own, which is why he was hanged. He obviously disputed that. And what Juanita Brooks did is write a history and mostly look at how the general climate, the feeling of paranoia in Utah at the time, with President Buchanan sending an army into Utah to depose Brigham Young as governor and have someone else installed and so forth, created that feeling of paranoia. And there's a lot of others like moving parts creating that situation where though the church headquarters and the church leadership may not have explicitly, there's no smoking gun, there's no documents. So we can assume that they did not explicitly order that kind of massacre, but they certainly laid the groundwork and created a climate in which something like this was possibly unavoidable. So that's the kind of book that Juanita Brooks wrote, and obviously has been mostly vindicated by books that came out, studies that came out on the subject afterwards. Funny anecdote. So the legend says that Juanita Brooks, being a school teacher, had a very old man come to her grandfather of one of the kids that she taught, and tell her that he wanted to talk to her about something where he was a part of, and so forth. And she, didn't have time because school teaching is hard and whatnot. Get like, well, let's do this in a couple of weeks when I have time. And by the time said old man had passed away, which is when she decided to actually research all the whole thing, because she felt bad for that. Makes for a really cool, compelling story of why that book was written. And what's interesting, and this is sort of like why it's like a funny anecdote here, the person in question, that old man, was Nephi Johnson. And Nephi Johnson is the grandfather or great-grandfather. I may have gotten one of the, but I think it's grandfather. The grandfather of Clive Bundy, of, not paying taxes or anything, and occupying, or at least his son and so forth, occupying national reserve, national parks near Oregon and so forth. So yeah, interesting connections there. Now you know even more about Mormon history. Shocking, isn't it? Hey, Chadia, how you doing? So yeah, this was Morning Mormonism with Raf, I guess. And I guess we'll have time for the first sprints very soon. And that is when I will have to pay my phone bill, which came in yesterday evening. And I think when I claim to do productivity in the morning, that might just be a really good use of my time to give money to my phone company and continue to have internet and stuff. Wouldn't that be cool? But yeah, that's why I have read both the Mountain Meadows Massacre by Juanita Brooks, and now making my way through Blood of the Prophets, which is, well, about the same thing, but 50 years later. So there's more research material on the subject, which is, helpful. After all, I aim to be the most well-informed person on BookTube when it comes to Mormonism. Since, no one will ever believe me that I know stuff about Arthurian literature, I figured Mormonism is the one where I can settle on becoming an expert. Not really, but, There's also like a book on Joseph Smith's presidential campaign from 1844 that I'm still thinking about maybe reading, although I feel it might be going too far for the Mormonism video. It's a really fascinating kind of thing, though, because Joseph Smith decided to run for president in 1844, and his presidential platform had some interesting things in there that you may not associate with Mormonism today, including prison abolition and, obviously abolition of slavery. He was very much in favor of strengthening the Federal Reserve or a central bank. He was very much in favor of, having a strong federal government and reducing, the impact of states' rights, because states' rights were, as Joseph Smith famously said, the basis for mob rule. And it's not exactly what you would connect with Utah's politics and Mormon politics today, but it's just like an interesting anecdote to see how very different some of original Mormonism's positions on topics were that are still very much, today's talk of the land in a lot of ways, right? So I might just read that specific book for my personal interest and so forth. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Liam is one of the people that I have asked to watch the Mormonism video in parts before I put it up, to make sure that I, don't make any big mistakes. So Liam is one of my sensitivity viewers. Other people have sensitivity readers. I don't have that yet, but I have sensitivity viewers for the anti-Semitism video. That was, for example, Joe Byrne, because his Jewish connections, being Jewish and knowing other people that are or have been rabbis and so forth. And hey, you mind looking at this? And Liam is one of the people I've asked for the Mormonism video. So maybe he's he certainly has more practical experience with Mormonism. That's for sure. And that's like the I think it's a strength and it's a weakness for me to make that video on Mormonism because I obviously have no personal experience. I've met some Mormons, hard to not to. I've visited a Mormon temple, or in this case, I guess it's still just a meeting house in Warsaw. Um, Obviously, you can't get into like a temple once it's sanctified, but they usually, before they invest like a temple, they have it usually open for like the first year or so before it's fully finished, where so people can go and visit and look at the inside. But once the thing is working, they obviously it has to only people with a temple permit can go inside. So they usually have it open before that to look at. And sometimes later on, when they need to do like renovations or whatever, it becomes obviously what's the word, unsanctified for a while because non-Mormon workers might actually have to go in there and do reparation, do renovations and shit, and that's usually the time when they afterwards leave it open for visitors for a couple of times. I've been to a Mormon meeting house in Warsaw. I've spoken with Mormons, but I have never lived in Utah or Idaho or any of the other parts of California that are heavily Mormon, so I lack that cultural experience. But on the other hand, because I don't have that, I may have a less I don't want to say less bias, but my biases might be very different because I lack that cultural sort of dimension and pressure. And from what I can tell, Mormonism does have certain measures of social control sort of accidentally built into the religion. So if you are a believing Mormon, it is very difficult to sort of act in certain ways because it does affect not only you but a lot of other people around you immediately. And that's like the really interesting part with the idea of temple permits and stuff like that, where there are ways of sanctioning and so forth that can be incredibly insidious. And but then again, there's enough anti and ex-Mormon and pro-Mormon content on YouTube done by members of the LDS Church and associated people. So I feel like maybe having a sort of more neutral approach to it might actually be beneficial. Who knows? Y'all find out in, I don't know, a week or so if I manage to actually finish the goddamn thing, which is, quite the challenge. All right, then have, well, fun at work, I guess, Chadia, and talk to you later, I guess. And yeah, let's actually get started with the actual sprinting stuff, and I'll talk to you in 45-ish, which I guess is right around 9 to 9:05, something like that. And I'm back, sort of, I guess. Hello, Britain again. How are you doing? What are you actually reading at the moment? And hello, Apollo. How are you doing this morning? I am definitely better than I was yesterday, but that was to be expected because turns out not drinking and actually sleeping are, helpful. Who would have thought? Certainly not me. I know. Shocking. I did at least manage to do the thing that I wanted to do, which is, pay the phone bill and reply to some comments and go through emails that have piled up. Robert Evans of Behind the Bastards and other podcast stuff wrote on his Substack an article on the guy who shot the healthcare CEO, and it was an interesting read. I think he's pretty good with like his specific analysis of what's his name, Mangione comes from, like, background wise, and his connections to the on the one hand the Grey Tribe kind of sort of tech bro kind of stuff, but also how that is not enough to characterize him. And good one. I can certainly recommend reading that if you feel like having the perspective of someone who has certainly hung out on too many of these forums where people radicalize themselves. So I would certainly say it's worth listening to someone like Robert Evans on that. Hey, Ida, how are you doing? Yeah, right. I've heard about it. It's something other people do, right? Oh, I have not read Deathless. That's the one in St. Petersburg, right? The Russia one. So yeah, so I read that one, and I read whatever on the whatever Parker Malloy was complaining about this time, understandably, which was once again the New York Times being transphobic. Who'd have thought? I mean, another shocking surprise right there. And so that's, I guess, my morning news diet sorted out. And yeah, I feel with that I'm more or less ready to do the writing thing in the second sprints. Although I also have to, oh gods, I have to play around with Amazon. I need to create a wish list, and I have been procrastinating about it. But if I keep procrastinating about it, I feel Chadia will probably haunt me forever, because we're doing like a Secret Santa kind of thing, and for that, obviously, you need to have like a wish list up on a Discord server so everyone can surprisingly pick something. And since it's just this is like an ADHD thing, right? In theory, making a wish list on Amazon is not that hard. I mean, I've done it once before, and it was not that hard, I think. But there's two things that come together. On the one hand, I need to make choices, and I'm really bad at making choices. And on the other hand, to add something, you search on it and you click on it, and it's really it takes slightly longer than I want it to take. Simply because I'm using a screen reader, which means I have to sort of like specifically navigate to the item, then find the button to click on, and do the same thing again and again. And it's one of those like dumb ADHD things where I start doing this, and as soon as I open the page, I get this like physical sort of almost physical reaction that wants me to stay away from it and not do it. There's like almost a physical resistance I need to overcome to do that, and it's frustrating because it's those kind of things that keep me from, like, oftentimes from doing easy things. It would be super easy, right? For example, I still need to put all the Malazan videos I did in the first year of the channel, right? I need to put those into playlists, and it's once again, it's not hard. It's just like 2 clicks or whatever. But as soon as I start, I get like this almost physical resistance to doing it, and I wish I knew what to do about it, but I don't. Beyond how, beyond just hoping that I catch the right moment where I can just do it. Yeah, yeah. Well, obviously Leningrad at the time. I have not read that yet. A very good friend of mine whose taste in books I do highly respect uh, has called it one of their favorite Valente books. So that's something. I've only read her what's it called, the Refrigerator Monologues, which I absolutely loved. It's so good. I don't know if you've read that, Britain, but I feel you, with your love for comic books, might also enjoy that one. It's really fun, really angry, and really sassy in a lot of ways, and I do appreciate that. Exactly. Exactly. As soon as it's a task, I'm bad at it. It's one of the reasons I said that. I think yesterday was one of the reasons why I have not yet committed to saying anything about the whole writing thing that I'm doing, because I feel it as soon as I say yes, it's going to be a novel, and there's going to be this and this and this. As soon as I make these things sort of fixed, as soon as I sort of like make declarative statements about them, it will get harder to work on it. I know that already, so I'm trying to not do that and just like play around with it until I have no choice but to accept that I have apparently done something. Britain, The Refrigerator Monologues. It's a collection of shorter stories, novellas, or whatever, told by women who are sitting in hell because they were murdered, fridged, so their lovers, boyfriends, whatever, at the same time could become superheroes. And it is very clearly inspired by Marvel and DC characters. Obviously, they get different names because you can't, necessarily fuck around with that kind of copyright. But it has that original, basically, story where the term fridging comes from, which I think was Green Lantern. I think it was Green Lantern. And it has one story that is very clearly inspired by Aquaman, and it has one that I think is basically about Harley Quinn and the Joker in interesting ways. So it does take those stories, and then but it's told by the women, and they talk about, like, what all the things they wanted to do and all the stuff they were really cool at, and then dying in ridiculous ways without ever fulfilling their potential. So it does have, obviously, it has a very clear agenda in that regard, which you might call political, but because it is just like incredibly well written, it's just also like a lot of fun, just because every one of those characters has, they meet always in that same bar in hell, and then they talk about why they are here, and it's fun. I recommend it. I think you might enjoy it. It's also relatively short, which I think is a bonus. Like, it's not the kind of concept that would work for like 600 pages, but it certainly works for like a 250-page sort of collection of like 5 or 6 stories in that regard. It's really fun. Yeah, as I said, I enjoyed it a lot, and I'm not even that much of a comic book reader, so I assume people who are into comic books will get even more out of it. And generally, just like I do just generally appreciate Kat Valente, her personality, the way she presents on social media, the way she the stuff she's interested in, the way she's also like incredibly open about about her ADHD and how it's impacting her writing or not writing, and what she's writing, and how she can do like more than one book in the series without doing something else in between because brain and stuff. So yeah, really cool. And if you're enjoying the Deathless one so far, Britain, that sounds good as well. As for Absolution, yeah, Vandermeer is one of those authors that have really weird licensing. Like, back in the day, I could get all of the Area X novels, the Southern Reach trilogy at the time, when it was still called Southern Reach Trilogy, and then something changed, and those audiobooks are no longer available, so I can only get the first one, and now obviously the new one that came out last month. And that's not how that's going to work. I'm not going to, read that until I have like access to all of the books. And there are obviously ways of doing that, but right now, the effort was always too much for me. Yeah, I can see that kind of book being somewhat gay man-ish in just like by virtue of where it's set and how it what it is about. It feels like something that Gaiman would also be interested in writing or could have written in the past. I mean, it's been a while since Gaiman wrote like any any actual novel. I think, I mean, the last thing like longer book published written by Gaiman was his Northern Norse mythology book, and that's just like retellings of Norse stories. And before that, I don't know, Ocean at the End of the Lane, possibly, or maybe there was something afterwards. But yeah, have you read A Fine and Private Place by Peter S. Beagle, though, Britton? Speaking of Gaiman-esque fiction, because that one I read it earlier this year, like in January, February, whatever. That one feels like the Neil Gaiman novel as such, and it's so much fun. Obviously, Peter Spiegel's writing, I personally appreciate it. I know there are some people who have trouble with it, but the whole story about Jonathan Ribbeck, who used to be a pharmacist, and then kind of his business failed, and he kind of gave up, and just now he lives in a graveyard in like an abandoned mausoleum, and there's a talking raven that helps him by stealing food for him, and Rebecca can talk to the spirits of the newly buried before they sort of fade away into the afterlife. So he kind of hangs out and helps them cope with being dead and coming to terms with slowly fading away. And then there's stuff happening around that, but you have a guy who can talk to the dead and a talking raven who can also talk to the dead, and you know in a prison, in a graveyard in New York. I think that's like the most Neil Gaiman setup for a novel ever, except it was written in 1959, I think. That's the thing, is like Peter S. Spiegel wrote that when he was like 18 or 19 years old. It's incredibly impressive for like a first novel by someone at that age, and also fun. So yeah, if you get a chance to pick up A Fine and Private Place, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's love stories set in a graveyard with a talking raven. That's that's the best pitch I can offer. So it's really cool. So yeah, I guess the plan is for the next sprints to write some, and ideally maybe also get that damn wish list together. That's like another thing that I found so fascinating, or frustrating, right? We all know that Amazon sucks, not only as a business, but also as a website. It gets worse every time, right? And one interesting thing is that you can have wish lists on Audible, right? But wish lists on Audible are not shareable. You can have a wish list on Audible, but you can't share it with anyone else. So no one else can actually see what's on your wish list and can, potentially buy you something. So what you have to do instead is find those audiobooks on Amazon and put it on your Amazon wish list, which means that it's very different for people to then just click on that, because unless they have an Amazon, have an Audible account as well, they'll suddenly have to pay the different price that non-Audible members have to pay. And there's no reason to not have like shareable wish lists on on Audible, right? We don't have that, so it's even more frustrating. So yeah, that's something I'll have to deal with as well. So let's just try all of that, I guess. I'll be back in 45 minutes, which will be 5 minutes past 10, and then we'll see how productive we've all been. So good luck with getting shit done. All right, I am back. Good night, Britain. I assume you are in bed by now. I hope so. Yeah. As for science fiction recommendations, now here's the thing. I have not read Murderbot, so I don't know about that one. I have read The Expanse. I enjoyed it. I think a lot of Alistair Reynolds stuff would definitely fit that bill, I would argue. I personally prefer Reynolds over the two guys that wrote The Expanse over James S.A. Corey. I think he has a bit more to offer, but it's still very, very digestible. He's written a lot of different topics, different series, and so forth. I really, really enjoyed his last standalone Eversion that came out, I don't know, 2022, I think. Earlier this year, of course, he had the last, I assume, Dreyfus, Prefect Dreyfus novel. Those are sort of like crimey police procedurals in space, set in his larger Revelation space universe. There's like three, the main Revelation space trilogy, Revelation Space, Redemption Arc, and Absolution Gap. Then there was another one. Oh God, what was his name? I need to check that one. That is sort of like following up on that. There is, as I said, those three Prefect Dreyfus novels. That's the Prefect, Elysium Fire, and Machine Vendetta. And there is Chasm City, which is also part of that specific universe. Now, what was that? I need to double check which one that final one is. I personally also really enjoyed his Poseidon's Children series. Inhibitor Phase, that was the one that I was missing. The Poseidon's Children series, which is science fiction, somewhat hard sci-fi, set in, well, partly in Kenya, partly in Portugal, and partly in space, of course. It does have elephants, which is really cool. It also has some neo-pronouns, which is also pretty neat for, the kind of like sort of like almost hard sci-fi written by an old white man. I'm, always impressed if someone does that. I did enjoy that one. And then he has a somewhat YA, I would argue, maybe not YA, but definitely younger characters. So in that regard, yes. A series. I tried to figure out what it is called. It does have Shadow Captain and two others so far, which is basically teen girl space pirates, which, highly recommendable in that regard. Hey, Kat, how are you doing? Those ones I did really enjoy as well. It's like a weird sort of like idea. So you have these basically spaceships, but they are using sails to sort of use solar winds to travel between places in the world, and they have like magnetic guns. So it's basically pirates, but in space. And the main characters of the first book are two teenage girls, and they remain the main characters. And obviously, they have like a pirate crew and everything. So it's teenage girl space pirates. And if that doesn't sound like something fun, I don't know what does. And yeah, as I said, like for a just like one book kind of introduction standalone, I do highly recommend Eversion. A lot of people do love House of Suns. I think it's a good book. I have just forgotten a lot about it because I read it like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. So yeah, the Revenger series is the Space Pirates one. It's the first one is Revenger. The second one is Shadow Captain, and I think there's a third one. Revenger. So yeah, the other one is the Poseidon's Children stuff starts with Blue Remembered Earth. And then it has On the Steel Breeze and Poseidon's Children. I just can't find out what the third Revenger book is called because my brain. Oh, I think it was called Bone Silence. Yeah, Bone Silence, perfect. Highly recommend that one if, once again, space pirates in teenage girl space pirates. Yeah, Alistair Reynolds, definitely someone. I mean, I think a lot of people sort of kind of know about him, but everyone went over and read the Expanse at this point. So Alistair Reynolds has become sort of like the one hard sci-fi author that kind of bridges the gap between Ian M. Banks and the Expanse, just like time-wise, because he started publishing. I mean, he started publishing in the 90s, and he has a degree in astronomy, so he actually worked in astronomy, so he kind of knows what he's talking about when he does talk about space and shit. And just generally, like, the thing I really really enjoyed or appreciated about Alistair Reynolds is that you can tell from his early books onwards that he is deliberately trying to do better. In that you can tell that he's actively trying to set his stories in places that are not just America or the UK. I mean, he's Welsh, I think. He lives in Wales, and he is very actively including lots of relatively early on women as main characters, having more than one woman as a main character. I feel he's actively trying to actually write novels that actually succeed at the Bechdel test. I think that's what he's trying, and I appreciate that. And once again, with the Poseidon's Children series, he didn't actively look at neopronouns and sort of like non-binary gender identities and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, that's once again respect for an old white man doing that at around 2010 or something is when the first one of those came out. So I appreciate someone trying. Is how I would say that. There's definitely other sci-fi stuff that I think is fun. If you want a really angry feminist one, I would recommend anything by Cameron Hurley. Like for a really cool one, The Light Brigade, which is basically time travel Starship Troopers, feminist Starship Troopers with time travel. It's really cool. It's incredibly well written. The structure is a bit weird because it's about time travel, so the individual events and chapters are not necessarily in a chronological order because stuff happens. I did really enjoy that. The one before that was The Stars Are Legion. That's also a really cool one. And her first trilogy is the God's War and two other ones that I Rapture, and I keep forgetting what the other one was. Infidel, I think. Those are about a very angry bounty hunter on a planet that has a lot of religious war, and people drink a lot of alcohol and decapitate people and so forth. It's very hard-boiled, very noir, very violent, and very explicitly angry feminist, which, yeah, really cool. One thing that's important with Cameron Hurley, though, is like a lot of her books have a lot of insects in it, um, and and often a lot of like fluids. Like Cameron Hurley likes to get somewhat icky when with like substances, I think, is part of like how I would say this. So if if you have like a kind of phobias or anxieties around, say, insects, and lot of weird sort of like yeah, uncleanness, I guess, is sort of what I would say, then that might not be the best thing to read. I would argue that the Light Brigade, I don't think, has much of that. Because, it's very much military sci-fi with people trying to figure out what went wrong, sort of, I guess. And it's very, very explicitly sort of like engaging with Starship Troopers, which, maybe some people should do from time to time. That's really productive, Ida. So I guess this is sort of where we end this. As Cameron Hurley and Alistair Reynolds, definitely both authors I really enjoy. There is, I can try to think of some more and probably mention them tomorrow or whatever. I just need to, think about it, I guess. But with all of this said, I guess I will now head out to the gym. I have not exactly written anything in the fiction thing today. I did write some yesterday, but the whole like wishlist thing took up way too much time. But then again, I was supposed to hand this in like yesterday at the latest, so I feel good for actually hitting that deadline. So yeah, maybe I'll record a video on Gog Magog by Jeff Noon and Steve Beard today, not yesterday. I'll record it today, and then it'll be up later today or tomorrow. Who knows? It's a good book. You should read it. It's also weird as fuck. So is the second part, which is obviously La Luda, which came out last week, and I really enjoyed both. If you like English sailor swearing, it's definitely the kind of thing I can highly recommend, because the main character, Katie Mead, is an angry old lady that used to be a ship's captain for like forever. So lots of swearing, lots of drinking, lots of tobacco abuse. Also possibly saving the world. But definitely the swearing takes absolute like priority here. All right, so thanks for hanging out. I'll see you tomorrow, I guess. Some of you, maybe. And until then, have a productive rest of the day. Or not, because apparently I'm unable to press the end stream button, which is fun. Let's see if it works now.